Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This movie is once again directed by James Gunn, just like the last two. Star-Lord, Rocket, Groot, Drax, Gamora, Mantis, and the rest of our favorite cosmic misfits are back for one last ride before Gunn moves over to run DC. These Guardians films have always been really special to me because I feel like they sort of inhabit this unique corner of the MCU, this sort of cosmic space stuff, which very easily could have felt like a just straight up Star Wars ripoff. The first one blew my expectations out of the water. I think a lot of people probably share that sentiment. The second one I enjoyed at the time, but that movie has only grown on me over the years. I really like both of these two Guardian films. So I did have some high expectations going into this, especially because this is supposed to be the last one. This is supposed to be the big climactic send-off for these characters, these Guardians, at least as a team. We all know how this stuff works. If Disney finds themselves in a tight spot financially in the future, they'll probably milk this IP for every penny it's worth, like they always do. So let's get into the plot of this film. Again, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so I'm going to try to be very vague with every plot point that I talk about. Basically, this film kicks off where the holiday special left us off. Everyone is at nowhere right now. The High Evolutionary is the new big bad villain introduced in this film, and he's after the Guardians for various reasons. Adam Warlock is now after the Guardians, as sort of teased in the post-credit scene of Volume 2. So now they must not only fight to save the galaxy, but each other as well. The first thing that I want to say is that when this film works, it really works, like extraordinarily well. There are definitely moments in this movie that got me choked up, that got the tears flowing, and I can't say that for the last 7 or 8 MCU entries or so. Really anything since Spider-Man No Way Home and Endgame, nothing has really been able to generate a strong emotional reaction from me, and in certain parts, this film absolutely does that. It is a lot to unpack. It runs at 2.5 hours, and a lot of it is very messy, but we're going to talk about the things that I loved first. As James Gunn has teased, this story is very centric on the character Rocket Raccoon, and I think the way they handled his story in this film is fantastic. Everything regarding his backstory and what they do with that character was enthralling. It was surprisingly moving at times and even quite disturbing. It's crazy to me that possibly the most engaging character in this film and in this trilogy as a whole is a CGI raccoon, but to give due credit, Bradley Cooper's voice work is incredible. He adds a lot to the character as well. It's not just the people working on the CGI. Some of the other characters do feel a little bit sidelined at times because of this big injection of Rocket's backstory, particularly Gamora and Drax. We'll talk more about them later. But Chris Pratt, another huge standout. A lot of people are quick to shut him down and say that he's just not that great of an actor. He's more of an action star. And I mean, if you watch the last couple of Jurassic World movies, you could definitely say he's clearly not trying very hard, because in this film, he delivers a genuinely great performance. There are moments where I was like, genuinely surprised by how good Chris Pratt is. I'm definitely about to butcher this actor's name, but Chukwudi Iwuji, I believe is how you say it, is great as the High Evolutionary. He's scary, he's intimidating, he has a strong screen presence, and he's definitely one of the most evil SOBs we have ever seen in the Marvel Universe. Like, this guy does some messed up shit. With that said, I do have some issues with the character's motive and the fact that he's not very sympathetic or interesting as a villain. I'm not saying every villain has to be sympathetic, right? But the best ones tend to be, and if you just give breadcrumbs or something to latch onto, and this guy doesn't really have much. He sort of eventually turns into the generic big baddie who's gonna stand around, yell at his minions when they don't do his bidding properly, and yeah, eventually a bunch of punching happens. He does have some interesting ideas on how he wants to like perfect society and things like that. But again, it turns into just mass destruction. That's all he wants to do, and killing the Guardians, and it just becomes less complex, less interesting than a lot of the other villains that we've seen in this franchise. Again, he wasn't bad, and I thought the actor did a great job. He just isn't as good as some of the better ones. This film is very gorgeous looking, that's one thing that I can say. A lot of people tend to complain about the CGI and the use of green screens in these sort of latest Phase 4, Phase 5 Marvel films. I think this one, the visual effects are really strong. You can tell a lot of people worked hard on this. The green screens don't look horrendous like they did in Ant-Man Quantumania. This movie is heavily action-packed. Some of the action sequences go on for a long time, too. There's one in particular that takes place in this corridor. Definitely one of the best highlight sequences of this trilogy as a whole. And in a couple of scenes, James Gunn's horror roots really show. I'm genuinely surprised that this was able to get by with a PG-13 rating. There are genuinely some really disturbing and horrific elements in here. It's very violent too. It definitely pushes the boundaries of what the PG-13 rating means, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I didn't dislike that about it. I was kind of surprised by it, honestly. I just find that some younger kids might find things disturbing in this movie, and parents might not expect that going into a Guardians of the Galaxy film. And I can't talk about this movie without mentioning the soundtrack. Guardians of the Galaxy has always been about music heavily, and the soundtrack in this one, I will say, it's fantastic. A lot of numbers in there that I really dig. I do feel that the placement of some songs might feel a little bit awkward. It sort of feels like when they needed a scene transition, they decided to just throw a song in there. It just isn't as well paced in terms of the soundtrack as the previous two films were. Also, in terms of the original soundtrack, John Murphy is composing this time instead of Tyler Bates. And I didn't mind the soundtrack, but to me, it had a lot of similarities to James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. And that just kind of was something that popped into my head every time the music starts kicking in. I was like, did he just take parts of the Suicide Squad soundtrack and just remix them into this movie? Again, not really a bad thing. If anything, it's just a nitpick, but it's something that I noticed. Now, I do want to get into a few things that I had issue with in this film because there are some that sort of glare out and stand out among the pack. The first of which, Adam Warlock. What a disappointment. I mean, this guy was sort of hyped up, not only in the marketing, but also at the post-credit scene of the previous Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And honestly, he's barely in the film. And when he is, he's really just used for comic relief. Maybe we get an action sequence with him here or there. And he's clearly played by a charismatic actor in the form of Will Poulter, so I don't understand why they didn't give him more to do. He's very powerful too. I mean, some of the fight scenes with him start out really good, and then they just sort of didn't know what to do with the character after that, so they give him just this really half-assed character arc that sort of fits in with the themes of the film, but it just wasn't very satisfying to me because it didn't feel earned. Let's talk about Gamora, because this is a tricky one. Obviously, the Gamora in this film is not the one from the previous films because she died in Infinity War and then was resurrected, brought back from 2012 in Avengers Endgame. So this is the version of her that never met up with the Guardians of the Galaxy and formed this family. So she starts out really rugged, and that's kind of what I expected. And then as the film progressed, it just kind of didn't really do anything significant with her. Again, I want to stay really light on spoilers, but she does sort of eventually have a little bit of a character arc, a little bit of a character turn, but it was really weird to me because it feels like they could have either gone full on with this character arc or not done it at all, and it would have made more sense. Here it just feels unearned, and it just feels like they didn't know what to do with her and they had to include her. But James Gunn didn't really know how to rework her back into the story after what they did with her in the Avengers films. Drax also feels underused. Again, a lot of people have been saying that he has more of a meaty storyline here than in the previous films because a lot of people complain that in Volume 2 he was just there for comic relief. And yeah, sure, he does get a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I found that he was just there for the jokes again, and some of them do land. Of course, Drax is very humorous in his sort of inability to comprehend metaphors and things like that. I just don't think that the humor in this film was as effective as it was previously. I think some of the jokes regarding his intelligence level become a little bit redundant. Again, this isn't Thor Love and Thunder, though. I don't want to give the impression that I thought the humor in this movie was horribly unfunny like it was in that film. There definitely is a lot that does land in this movie, just not on par with the previous few. The third act, in large part, does do a lot of the heavy lifting in giving each Guardian their sort of moment to shine, their moment to show off their powers, and also sort of complete their character arc that they've gone through over these past 3 films. And I don't think that they totally squandered it or anything. I just wish that some of the characters got more focus early on in the film and didn't feel like they were just kind of shoehorned in this little snippet of development at the very end. Again, this movie's so long and it feels like they wound up delegating a lot of time to going to this location, getting this device, that we need to do this, and then we need to go talk to this person, when it should feel a little bit more character focused because this is the conclusion to this group of Guardians. Overall, this is a good film. I did enjoy it for the most part, but I do think it's fair to say that you should probably taper your expectations if you're going and expecting something like Avengers Endgame or Spider-Man No Way Home. I don't think this is the best film since Endgame, but I did enjoy it a lot. Definitely the weakest of the trilogy, but to be fair, both of the previous films set a very high bar. The very end of the movie is terrific, it's heartfelt, it's emotional, it got the tears flowing. Again, you know, it's tough to think of a Marvel film in the last couple of years that has been able to generate emotion, and again, I do think they use a little bit of manipulative tactics to sort of get you to feel emotional. Like certain songs and certain repetitive beats from the previous 2 movies, especially the first one, of course those are going to get you worked up because, well, we know this is the last time we're going to see this. But it was effective nonetheless, and I did enjoy the film as a whole. I'm going to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do recommend that you check this out, especially if you're a fan of this franchise. And who knows, maybe you'll walk out thinking my review is a little bit harsh. It can't hurt to go in with lower expectations because you'll probably just enjoy the film even more than you would expect to. I'm tempted to include a spoiler section on this video, but I hate doing that and giving like a time frame where people who haven't seen the movie yet have to click off. Maybe I'll do a full separate spoiler review in the future, but as always guys, I do want to know spoiler-free thoughts, of course, down in the comments. What did you think of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3? Are you excited for this? Is this the end of the MCU as you know it, or do you plan to keep watching these films in the future? If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.